So today I was going to make an agent tier list after the tail nerfs to see round about where we are right now, but I decided instead it would be better to do it tomorrow and first actually explain something that I don't think I've ever really gone into too much detail about on this channel, and that is explaining what do I think actually makes a good agent. And so today we're going to talk about the C.R.I.E.S system. And we're going to go through 5 things that I think make a good agent. Now, I think in general, I've become pretty good at determining whether a new agent, when they come out, is going to be pretty good or not. You know, I thought Tail would be good. I thought Vice would be good. I didn't think that Deadlock or, ISO when he first came out or Clove would be that good, especially not at the highest levels. And so I think I've gotten pretty good at understanding what makes an agent good or not in the game of Valorant. And so today I thought we'd go through it and share some of the things on the list that I think are important. And we're going to start off here with the C, which I think is by far the least important of the things that we're going to talk about today, but that is combos. Now, you can definitely be good without having really any good combos with other agents, right? A good example of that would be during the Chamber meta, right? Did Chamber really have to combo with other agents to be particularly good? Not really, right? He could just stand wherever he wanted, TP halfway across the map, be out of there, get a kill, and you're just in a good situation, right? So you don't have to have combos to be a particularly great agent, and you can just be completely self-sustaining and be incredibly overpowered in other ways. That means that you don't really need to have combos. However, having combos, I think, does play to your advantage. And I think Chamber is another good example of that. When Chamber got nerfed, now his pick rate always seems to be quite low because potentially he doesn't combo that well with other agents. Whereas if you do have good combos with a bunch of other agents, in the pool, well, that means that if any of them are particularly strong, well, your pick rate is probably going to be up there as well, right? If you combo well with whatever is really strong, right? A good example of that would be Breach, most recently, right? Breach combos pretty well with the Teo Yoru meta that we've just seen. So Breach's pick rate is, one of the highest agents, like, maybe like the 4th most picked agent in the entire game. Well, that's because he combos well with, other things that can be strong. So whilst combos in and of itself maybe is not, the most important thing to being a good agent, obviously if you can combo with other agents pretty well, then yeah, you're gonna see more pick rate more of the time. The next thing, the R, is refreshable / reusable utility. And we have seen this obviously in a big way with Sky, and we're about, again, I think, to see it with Teo, because not having refreshable / reusable utility, particularly when a lot of your competitors in a similar space do, as we have definitely seen with Sky and probably will with Teo, can be a bit of a death sentence, to be honest, because it's just a big deal, right? Particularly at the higher levels where rounds are a bit slower, you're just going to have more utility, right? And obviously having more utility is just good. There's no downside to just having more of a thing, right? And what's interesting about this is that when we take a look at, for instance, some of the other things that we're going to go into, we can take Teo as our example, of course, of having an insanely strong refreshable ability, right? And that is where the crux of Teo, and his dominance really came about. Yeah, the drone is good, very, very good drone as well, but, they didn't nerf the drone in any significant way, and yet now everyone thinks that Teo is going to be absolutely awful, mainly, I think, because they changed how the salvos work. They don't have any refreshable utility for Teo right now, and that's a big major deal, right? And this is the thing as well with Teo, because when we look at some of the other things on this list as we go through it, you might look at some of the other things and be like, oh, Teo has some of that, but it's maybe not, super, super good at that thing, Teo, right? But the thing is, if you have like an 11 out of 10 on any of these things, which I would say that Teo did, Teo's refreshable utility in the salvos was like an 11 out of 10, right? Like it was an incredibly strong refreshable ability, right? And we saw that cause obviously a lot of problems with the post plants and stuff like that, right? We all know the problems with Teo. And so that's kind of the thing. If you do have like an 11 out of 10 in any of these categories, you're probably going to like fundamentally break the game in some way, which you could say that Teo kind of did, right? With the kind of post plants, right? We can use the salvos to enter onto the site. It's an incredibly strong ability to be able to, remove space from where defenders can play and, give us a chance of entering in onto the site. And then I can just sit back and win the post plant with the salvos when they come back online again, right? And that obviously is an incredibly frustrating thing to play against. And as we saw, kind of in some way did break the game because post plants in a sense became maybe a bit too easy. The The next thing is very important, and I'm sure everyone would agree, and that is information, right? Our eye is information. And again, at the high level, but even in your ranked games, to be honest, having good information, you know, is very important. If you know exactly where everyone on your opposing team is, you know, that's pretty good. If you're playing with radar, you probably will win a lot of your games, right? So having information, yeah, is obviously pretty good, and we've seen, you know, multiple agents, you know, take advantage of this. Obviously, this is why kind of the initiators, recon initiators are pretty much played on every single map, like all of the time, right? Because guess what? Having information of where people are, turns out that's pretty good. The next one, the E, is escapability / enter ability. And this doesn't just have to be, obviously, when you first kind of hear those words, your first instinct might be to go to things like jet dash, raise satchels, and obviously those things, yeah, those are good, right? Those are good ways of, you know, escaping or entering onto the site, and they definitely would fit into this category, right? And obviously with like the old jet of being able to dash, you know, anytime, any place, that was, you know, incredibly good for Jet at that point, and it's why Jet was, you know, incredibly strong, right? The same thing for Chamber, right? If we were rating Chamber on the scale, you might be like, well, the old Chamber had some information, didn't combo that well with other people, had some refreshable utility, but, you know, it was maybe hard to use the TP multiple times in a round, right? All the time. Maybe that wasn't, you know, the easiest thing to always do. Sometimes you would, but not always, right? So how was the old Chamber, you know, so good? Well, it was mainly because Chamber was like an 11 or even a 12 out of 10, right? On the E here, the escapability, right? The Chamber was such a threat, kind of broke the scale on the escapability chart, that, you know, it kind of changed fundamentally how the game would be played, right? Like Teo did with post plants, Chamber would do in terms of, you know, oh, well, we got to find the Chamber and push the Chamber back, otherwise, you know, we're in a terrible situation, and we always have to use util to re-clear, you know, and things like that, right? So Chamber obviously kind of broke the scale here, and it doesn't just have to be those kind of abilities though, right? Things like, you know, smokes, right, can give you an escapability chance, right? A Cypher Cage can give you a chance to escape out of a situation that you might not otherwise be able to, right? And it might not, you know, always be perfect, but for instance, one of the reasons that maybe a lot of people are playing Cypher now over Killjoy is because if you're playing Cypher, you know, you do have a chance to potentially get out of a bad situation that maybe a Killjoy wouldn't be able to. And then the final one here, our S, is stopping power. Now, stopping power basically just means when people are trying to, you know, come to a site or come into an area that you're defending, you're able to go, no, you're not going to do that. I'm going to throw some utility at you, and you're not going to be able to come in. And this matters a lot, because pretty much every single round, you know, most rounds in Valorant will come at some point to a site exec. Well, if you can stop that as the defenders, you're doing pretty well. Or even if the defenders are pushing out and you as the attackers are able to, you know, stop them from being able to push out on you, you know, you omen paranoia them or something, right? You push them back, you know, you stop their planning in their tracks, and they have to go back, and, you know, it gives you information, you know, you push them back, you can now go to the other side of the map, right? You can take the space that they potentially left. Pretty good as well, right? So it can work for both sides. Obviously, again, in post plants as well, stopping power of them not being able to come in. Interesting enough, this is one of them where stopping power, I would say, in ranked, you know, where you get more and more just straight site execs. You know, you think of agents like Sage maybe being better in ranked than they are in pro play. Well, that's because stopping power is perhaps more important in ranked than it is in pro play, because, you know, generally it's going to be faster paced, just hit a site kind of thing. And so if you have a good agent with good stopping power, that's going to be worth more to you in a ranked game. But in terms of like how agents fit on this scale, right, you can have all sorts of examples. As I've talked about, you can have like the old Chamber or Teo, who potentially have like, you know, an 11 out of 10 on one of these. You know, for instance, if we take Teo, the old Teo, right, like refreshable, reusable utility, maybe that's an 11 out of 10 for someone like Teo, right? Because the ability that was refreshable was just so strong, right? But he also has some information. But you might be like, well, did Teo have the best stopping power, or did he have the best escapability? You know, sometimes the salvos would come in a little late. Yeah, he's got some combos as well, but really it can be just sometimes like one thing is just so kind of out there and a problem that, you know, it just is a problem. And you can think about that in terms of Chamber and Teo, in terms of the way that Riot went about nerfing those agents as well, right? With Chamber, the big problem, of course, was the escapability, right? Was like a 12 out of 10. But they didn't nerf the escapability until like the very end, right? And Chamber's pick rate stayed extremely high because he still had a 12 out of 10 the entire time, right? And it wasn't until they really nerfed that eventually it was like, okay, now Chamber, you know, is fully nerfed. With Teo, they've kind of gone straight to the problem, because had they nerfed the other parts of Teo's kit, right, had they made the alt 9 cost, and maybe they nerfed the drone, and so it's shorter and not as good of a drone, still probably would have seen a lot of Teo. But you can have other strong agents, and I think Omen is a good case of this, where does Omen have some combos? Yeah, you can paranoia someone and then they're deafened, right, and you Yoru TP behind them and they don't know where they are and all that kind of stuff. Does he have refreshable utility? Yeah, the smokes come up all the time, right? Can he get information? This is perhaps the one that Omen is a bit lacking in. You could ult for information, right, but, you know, generally not so much, but he has a lot of escapability and some enterability as well, and has incredibly good stopping power with the paranoia. But this is what I find so interesting about Omen, is that Omen is it's, you know, kind of been, you know, one of the most picked agents for a very long time at this point, but a lot of people don't think that Omen needs nerfing. And I think that's interesting, and I think the reason is because whilst Omen scores high on a lot of these things, right, he maybe isn't like an 11 out of 10 on any of them. So he doesn't like break the game in any kind of significant way, right? Or like fundamentally changes how the game seemingly should be played in our minds. But he's still very, very strong on a lot of them. And so you will get a lot of people saying that Omen doesn't need nerfing because he isn't an 11 out of 10, but maybe is more of an 8 or 9 out of 10 on quite a few different ones of these things. But there is one agent that did give me a bit of trouble with this system overall, and that is ISO. Now, when ISO first came out, I knew that ISO wouldn't be very good, but since the ISO changes, and if we look at where ISO is right now, you might not score him super high on quite a lot of these different things. But ISO, I think, is okay, right? I don't think ISO is an amazing agent, but I'd put him probably somewhere like in the B tier, right? As like still an okay agent, but might not rate so highly. So I do want to say that perhaps, you know, there is some things that are being slightly missed here, right, in terms of some of the things that ISO can maybe do. So that is one agent that I think, you know, maybe the C.R.I.E.S system slightly misses out. But when the next agent comes out, you can definitely refer back to this video, take a look at it, and probably find that, you know, you'll have hopefully a decent idea of what makes an agent good the next time one comes out.